Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan also signing a mutual defense pact that stipulates, similar to NATO, that an attack against any one of them shall be regarded as an attack against them all. What do you make of some of these types of moves? Let's talk about the alliance, for example. What do you make of that more formalized alliance? And does that signal anything to you about where the Middle East is headed?
Yeah, Omar, I think this is the result of concern about the United States and whether the United States is capable of responding. I think the United States has impacted on its credibility and on its trust in terms of whether or not the United States can provide the support and the security that other countries need. And so these countries, whether it's Europe, whether it's Turkey and other countries, have decided to try to build coalitions that can provide for their own security. I think all of that is a reflection that there is a tremendous amount of concern about whether the United States can really provide the support system and the security that it used to provide in the past.
What do you think of this request for ideas, this crowdsourcing notions for how to deal with Iran?
Well, I think it's a good idea. Now, c.n.n. wasn't clear. It said in the headline they were requesting it of troops. In the write-up, it says you were requesting it of analysts. I can assure you that they didn't send me a note, so I suspect they're trying to keep that internal to the uniformed military. Look, I was a CENTCOM planner many, many years ago. I was a planner many, many years ago, and we were always reaching out to the different intelligence agencies and other organizations to develop branches and sequels. That's not a sign of failure. It just is a sign that, as we say, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So after you've been fighting the campaign for a while, it's good for you to think about, now that we know where we are, beyond what the plan said, how do we take it forward? So I think it's refreshing that Admiral Cooper is doing this. I think there are many that suggest that this is a sign of failure. I wouldn't consider it that at all. I think it's a pretty good idea, as a matter of fact.
So where do you think things stand today with Iran? The president said he was calling off a planned bombing campaign. He said there could be talks as soon as today. The Iranians, they're not saying that there's any talks going on. But if there are talks, do you think that, I don't know if this is the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th time, but do you think this will be the charm?
Look, we've got a lot of diplomacy left in this entire campaign. I'm glad to see the president mentioned nuclear capabilities, because too many people are getting distracted by the issue with the Strait of Hormuz. That is important, no doubt, but the core elements of the plan and the reason we went to military conflict is to end their nuclear program, push back their missile program, and cut their links with proxies. And I fear that if we focus too much on the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to allow the Iranians to divert the entire campaign from the core principles.
The Memorandum of Understanding, which is no longer in effect, to what extent did that address your concerns about the Iran nuclear program? If the United States gets back to the Memorandum of Understanding, is that enough?
It's a start. You remember the Memorandum of Understanding was an agreement to start discussions. It was in many ways meant to be a confidence-building measure between the two sides to see if we could get to the real diplomacy, which were those 3 points that I mentioned. It obviously didn't work. If we get back to a working memorandum of understanding that allows us to get back to negotiations on the key principles, that'll be a good thing. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we've got a lot of war fighting left to do. And that goes back to what Admiral Cooper is trying to do, figure out some other ways in branches and sequels.
Right now, it appears Iran is not talking directly with the U.S. what can truly be accomplished without direct talks?
Well, let's go back to the MOU that was signed back in June, and I don't have the exact language in front of me, but it told Iran to work with Oman to develop a mechanism for managing navigation in the Strait that would be consistent with international law and the sovereign rights of the coastal states. So the MOU does tell Iran to work through Oman on this, or work through this with Oman. I would expect then, as it becomes public, both regional allies will have an opinion, and as I understand, they're generally favorable of whatever it is that it says, and the U.S. will have an opinion as well. But at this point, I'm not shocked that Iran is working through the mechanism with Oman solely. I think we need to see what it says, what the provisions are that are within that agreement.
Okay. Meanwhile, there's threats going back and forth right now. What do you believe Iran feels about this last chance threat?
So I think I'm not going to say they feel that they called the president's bluff, but the president backed off, I think, for a variety of reasons. One of them probably being that key allies in the Gulf, particularly the Saudis, convinced him that it was time to prioritize diplomatic efforts as opposed to additional military action. Even though U.S. Central Command has done a lot to destroy Iranian naval capability, they haven't eliminated the threat in the Strait of Hormuz, nor can they. And there's no indication that they've moved the needle on Iran's strategic calculus. So, there might be some question on the efficacy of those strikes. The other thing I'd say is Iran's activities of the last 2 weeks demonstrating that their range and ability to hold regional energy infrastructure at risk goes far beyond the Straits of Hormuz, whether it's the Houthis down at the Bab el-Mandeb, attacks against ports in the Red Sea, or even as far as Egypt. I think our Gulf allies convinced the president that this is not the time to try a very large military campaign against Iran, and that, again, to prioritize those diplomatic efforts.
Okay. We also have Secretary Rubio, who's saying the U.S. was involved in the negotiations between Iran and Oman on the Strait. Iran has said its goal in talks with Oman is to set temporary arrangements lasting 1 to 3 months where, and here's the quote, where Iran is dominant. Would the U.S. agree to that? Do they have a vote or even a choice at this point?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think, we need to see what it looks like. I think three things maybe that we'll look at. One is what kind of fee structure, if any, is there? Is there some voluntary fee, as the initial reporting said, that would help pay for search and rescue, for the cost of administering navigation, for environmental damage, or is it a flat out toll? I think that's definitely something that not just the U.S., but the rest of the world would oppose. And then what kind of coordination will occur between Iran and Oman in terms of the channels that they manage? Perhaps that's where Iran seeks to be dominant. And then third, what will be done in terms of demining and making the channels safe for commercial traffic, again, in the Strait of Hormuz?
The Center for Strategic and International Studies has done an analysis of this. We are also hearing from our own sources saying that these stockpiles, especially of things like Patriot missiles, have been depleted, in that case for the Patriots, by 2/3. So when the president says it makes America look weak and he's frustrated with it, how big of a problem is this, in your estimation?
Yeah, good morning, Sarah. It is a big problem. I mean, when you look at the figures, it's, to deplete 2/3 of our Patriot resources for a conflict with Iran, when there are other conflicts going on, including Ukraine, that becomes a big issue. And we also have to keep in mind, we might end up having to defend a country like Taiwan in the face of Chinese aggression, potential Chinese aggression. So these are the kinds of things that, should keep military planners up at night, and they certainly seem to be keeping up the president at night. And when you look at all the different things that are going on in terms of the need for these kinds of munitions, it really shows the need to revamp the defense industrial base, and that, of course, is a very serious issue. The president and the Department of Defense have started to work on that. The president invoked the Defense Production Act this past month, and that's certainly a start in fixing things. But in addition to fixing these areas, what they also need to do is develop more innovative weapons that are cost effective. They're starting to do that, and that is one of the things that, of course, should be part of the Defense Department's agenda at this point.
Beth, I am curious, we've talked about this before, that sort of Iran has this new tool to needle countries that it finds to be hostile towards it, and that's the Strait of Hormuz. It used to be the nuclear program. Now the Strait has become sort of its favorite child. When you look at what they are doing now by kind of bypassing talks with the United States and going to Oman and making these demands, what does this all mean for where we are in this war, and how long this could go on, and what this is going to mean, for example, to the world's economy?
Right. I mean, there's a lot there. And I think that, the big picture here is that Iran is very emboldened right now. They're in a different place strategically with the IRGC in control, as we have said for many, many months. And they're really playing hardball. I mean, after we bombed them for 13 days straight, they turned around after we ended that. They preemptively surprised the president by sending ballistic missiles into our troops in Jordan. And, so they are not going to be willing to give up this option. And what they're doing right now with this bilateral negotiation with Oman is definitely trying to set up a permanent structure where they will control the strait and what traffic goes into the strait. And that means if an empty tanker wants to go in and fill up oil from Kuwait or Bahrain or whatever, they could stop that from happening. And so, over the long term, this would change not just the structure of the Middle East and kind of who can wield power there. Iran wants to do this to protect themselves.